Hello everyone. In today's lecture we are going to discuss about one of the macro mineral, that is phosphate. So phosphate is one of the macro minerals. So let us start with the phosphate. An adult body contains about 1 kg phosphate and it is found in every cell of the body. That means in adult human body overall contains 1 kg of phosphate, and this phosphate is formed in various structures such as bones, teeth, and our cells also. So 1 kg of phosphate is present in our body, that means in adult human body, and it is found in every cell of the body. Most of it, that means 80%, occurs in combination with calcium in the bones and teeth. That means out of this 1 kg, 80% is present in the bones and teeth, while 10% of it is found in muscles and in blood, with association in proteins, carbohydrates, and lipids. And remaining 10% is widely distributed in various chemical compounds. So 80% is present in our bones and teeth, while 10% is present in body fluids and muscles, while remaining 10% is present with various chemicals such as ATP, AMP, and like this. Let us see the dietary requirements of phosphate in our body. So dietary requirements of phosphate, which is based on the intake of calcium also. That means the dietary requirement of phosphate is depend upon the intake of calcium. Calcium and phosphate are distributed in the majority of natural foods in 1:1 ratio. That means in our natural foods already calcium and phosphate are available at the same time in the proportion that is 1:1. So therefore adequate intake of calcium generally take care of phosphate also. That means intake of calcium take care of phosphate also, because in natural food phosphate and calcium both are present in the same proportion. So recommended dietary allowance, that means RDA of phosphate, is based upon or depend upon the intake of calcium. The ratio of calcium and phosphate is 1:1 is recommended for an adult. So the dietary requirement is 100 mg per day. So calcium and phosphorus are required in our body in the same proportion or the same recommended value, that are 800 mg per day. That means calcium is required 800 mg per day. Also phosphate is required same proportion, same quantity, that is 800 mg per day. So this requirement is for adult, while in the fetus or in infants, however, the ratio is around 2:1. That means calcium is more required in the infants than phosphate. So calcium requirement is double as compared to the phosphate in the infants. And this requirement is fulfilled by the human milk, that means mother's milk. Now biochemical functions of phosphate. So let us see the biochemical functions of this phosphate. That means this phosphate is required for which functions of our body. So phosphorus is essential for the development of bones and teeth. So like calcium, phosphate is also requirement or most of the essential mineral for the development of bones and teeth. Now second biochemical function is It plays a central role for the formation and utilization of high energy phosphate compounds. For example, ATP, GTP, and creatinine phosphate. So, this phosphate plays an important role in the formation of such compounds, that means ATP, GTP, and creatinine phosphate. So, ATP, that means adenosine triphosphate, GTP is guanosine triphosphate. So, phosphate molecules are required for the formation of such compounds. Now, third biochemical function is phosphorus is required for the formation of phospholipids, phosphoproteins, and nucleic acid, such as deoxyribose nucleic acid and ribonucleic acids. So, phosphate is required for the formation of various chemical compound. Now, the next function of phosphate in our body is that it is an essential component of several nucleotide coenzymes. So, let us see few examples of nucleotide coenzymes: NAD plus, NADP plus, pyridoxal phosphate, ADP, and AMP. So, for these nucleotide coenzymes, phosphate is the essential component. So, let us see one example from this. NAD, that means nucleotide nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. So, this is the full form of NAD, that means nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. And chemical formula of this NAD is C21H27N7O14 and P2, and this P, that means phosphate molecules. So, for the formation of this NAD, phosphate molecules are required. So, this phosphate is essential component of such nucleotide coenzymes. Now, the next function of phosphate, that is several proteins and enzymes are activated by phosphorylation. So, phosphorylation, that means it is a biochemical process in which there is a addition of phosphate molecules. So, for better understanding, here I will give an example of phosphorylation process. If we take one molecule, that is one compound, that is AMP, that means adenosine monophosphate. When this compound get added with the phosphate molecule, then it will form ADP. So, AMP, that means adenosine monophosphate. When added with this phosphate molecule, it will form another molecule, that is ADP, and this ADP is adenosine diphosphate. So, this process is called as phosphorylation, because in phosphorylation process there is a addition of phosphate molecules in the organic compounds. So, these phosphate molecules plays important role for several proteins and enzymes, and they get activated with the help of this process, that is phosphorylation. So, as if we add in this ADP one phosphate molecule again, then it will form ATP, that means adenosine triphosphate. So, addition of phosphate molecules, that means phosphorylation. So, phosphate molecules plays important role in the phosphorylation process. Now, next function of phosphate, that is phosphate buffer system. It is important for maintenance of pH in the blood, and the pH is 7.4, and this is maintained with the help of various buffer systems. So, one of this buffer system is the phosphate buffer system. So, phosphate molecules plays important role in the maintenance of pH, that means acid base balance. So, there are three types of buffer system in our body: bicarbonate buffer system, protein buffer system, and last one is a phosphate buffer system. So phosphate buffer system, that means when any strong acid mixed with the fluid which contains phosphate molecules, then this phosphate molecules combines with the strong acid and forms weak acid, and like this acid base balance get maintained. So and like this, when a strong base combine with fluid which contains phosphate molecules, then it will form weak base, and like this acid base balance get maintained. So phosphate buffer system plays important role in the maintenance of pH, that means acid base balance of our body. So this is one of the important function of this phosphate. Now the sources of phosphate, that means in which foodstuff phosphate is present. So sources of phosphate are milk, cereals, leafy vegetables, meat and eggs. So these are the sources of phosphate. Now after ingestion of the foodstuff which contains phosphate molecules, where this phosphate get absorbed in our GI tract. So absorption is takes place in the jejunum. So phosphate absorption occurs from jejunum, and this phosphate absorption again affects some factors again affects the phosphate absorption. So let us see which factors affects phosphate absorption in our GI tract. So first factor is calcitriol, that means vitamin D. Second is dietary intake of calcium and phosphate, that means dietary intake of proportion of calcium and phosphate. Then third one is acidity of GI tract, and fourth one is the phytates. So let us see one by one how these factors affects the absorption of phosphate from our GI tract. So first factor, that is vitamin D. So this vitamin D promotes phosphate absorption along with the calcium. So vitamin D plays important role in the absorption of calcium as well as phosphate from our GI tract. Then second factor, that is ratio of calcium and phosphate intake. So absorption of phosphorus and calcium is optimum when the dietary intake Ca, that means calcium, with proportion of phosphate is between 1:2 and 2:1. That means when we take calcium and phosphate in the ratio as 1:2 or 2:1, that means calcium is 1 and phosphate is 2. That means calcium intake is half to that of phosphate intake. And second is the 2:1. So 2:1, that means calcium intake is double to that of phosphate intake. So when this ratio get maintained, then phosphate absorption is optimum. Phosphate and calcium absorption, both the absorption get maintained or promoted. Now third factor is acidity, that means pH level should be low in the GI tract. So acidity favors the phosphate absorption. So when our GI tract with low pH, then phosphate absorption get promoted or get increases. Now last one factor is, that means phytate. So phytates are the chemicals which are present in some food stuff such as sesame, soybeans and rice bran also. So these phytates decreases phosphate uptake by the intestinal cells. So like calcium, phosphate also get decreased absorption in the presence of phytate molecules. Now let us see the serum phosphate level, that means in how much amount the phosphate is present in our body fluids. So serum phosphate level, The phosphate level of whole blood is around 40 mg per dl, while serum contains about 3 to 4 mg per dl. So there is a difference between phosphate level in the whole blood and in serum. So in whole blood there is a level of phosphate that is around 40 mg per dl, while in the serum it is only about 3 to 4 mg per deciliter. Why there is a big difference in the whole blood level and in the serum level? Because whole blood contains form elements such as RBC, WBC and platelets also. But in serum the form elements are absent. So from this we can conclude that phosphate is more present in the RBC, WBC, that means in our form elements. So this difference is because the RBC and WBC have very high content of the phosphate, so that in our whole blood the phosphate level is 40 mg per deciliter, while in our serum this phosphate level get decreases because there is absence of RBC and WBC. So in serum the level of phosphate is about only 3 to 4 mg per deciliter. Now let us see the next point, that is excretion of phosphate. From where it get excreted? About 500 mg of phosphate is excreted in urine per day. So excretion amount is given here and the organ through which it is excreted. So urine, that means from the kidney. So per day there is an excretion of 500 mg through the urine, while the recommended daily requirement is 800 mg per day. So this is state when there is a hyper excretion of phosphate in the urine, or there is a more level in the blood, what will happen? So let us see in this. So serum phosphate level is increased in the hypoparathyroidism and decreased in the hyperparathyroidism, because in hypoparathyroidism, that means there is a less secretion of hormone PTH. So hypoparathyroidism, that means less secretion of parathormone, and hypersecretion of PTH, that means hyperparathyroidism. So parathormone plays important role in phosphate absorption from GI tract, also plays important role in excretion of phosphate from urine through urine. So parathormone responsible for phosphate excretion through the urine, also it plays important role, that means it increases the phosphate absorption from bones, and also it increases the absorption of phosphate from our GI tract also, and with the help of vitamin D. So when this parathormone secretion decreases, that means hypoparathyroidism, then phosphate excretion also get decreases, so that phosphate level in the serum get increases. So serum phosphate level is increases in the hypoparathyroidism, because parathormone plays important role in the excretion of phosphate through urine, and when this hormone gets secreted in the less quantity, then it will affect the excretion of phosphate through urine, that means there is a less excretion of phosphate from urine, and so that there is an increase in the serum phosphate level. So vice versa, when it decreases, that means it decreases serum phosphate level in the hyperparathyroidism. So next, in severe renal diseases, serum phosphate content is elevated, causing acidosis, because from kidney phosphate get excreted out, and when there is a severe renal diseases, this serum phosphate content get elevated because there is a less excretion or no excretion from the kidneys through the urine. So it will cause acidosis because increased phosphate molecule. Now third is vitamin D deficient rickets is characterized by decreased serum phosphate, and that is 1 to 2 mg per deciliter. So when vitamin D get deficiency, then vitamin D plays important role in the absorption of phosphate absorption from GI tract, and when there is a vitamin D deficiency, then phosphate absorption from GI tract get decreases. So during vitamin D deficient rickets, there is a decreased phosphate level in the serum, and that is 1 to 2 mg per deciliter. Just we have seen that normal serum phosphate level is 3 to 4 mg per deciliter, and it get decreases to 1 to 2 mg deciliter when there is a deficiency of vitamin D, because vitamin D plays important role in the phosphate absorption from our GI tracts. So before concluding today's lecture, let us have a short recap on today's lecture, so that we have to go on the first slide. So in an adult human body, total phosphorus composition is 1 kg, and out of this 1 kg, 80% is present in our bones and teeth, while 10% is present in the muscle and body fluids, and while remaining 10% is present with the various chemical compounds. So in our human body, or we can say the adult human body, phosphorus composition is 1 kg, and out of this 1 kg, 80% present in bones and teeth, while 10% present in the muscle cell and body fluid, and remaining 10% is present in the form of various chemical compounds. Then phosphate dietary requirements, that means how much phosphorus is required per day by human body. So that is 800 mg per day, as phosphorus and calcium are required in the human body in the same proportion, that is 1:1. So calcium daily requirement is also 100 mg per day, and phosphorus requirement is also 800 mg per day. So this is the dietary requirement, 800 mg per day for an adult. Now let us see the biochemical functions of phosphate. So phosphorus is one of the essential macromineral for the development of bones and teeth. It plays important role in the formation of various chemical molecules such as ATP, GTP, creatinine, phosphate. It also plays important role in the formation of some chemicals such as phospholipids, phosphoproteins, and nucleic acids. Phosphate also plays important role in the several nucleotide coenzyme, because phosphate is one of the essential component of these nucleotide coenzymes. For example, NAD, NADP, pyridoxal phosphate, ADP, and AMP. So all these nucleotide coenzyme contains phosphate. So here one example is given, NAD, and the chemical formula of this NAD is C21H27N7O14 and P2, and this P2, that means phosphorus 2 molecules. So all these nucleotide coenzymes contains this phosphate molecules. Now next biochemical function is several proteins and enzymes are activated by the phosphorylation. So phosphorylation is the process in which there is the addition of phosphorus molecules to the organic compounds. Now next function is phosphate buffer system. So phosphate maintains our blood pH, that means ultimately it maintains the acid base balance in our body. Now the sources of phosphate, that means from which foodstuff we can get phosphate. So sources of this phosphorus are milk, cereals, leafy vegetables, meat and eggs. Then absorption. So after ingestion of food, the phosphate absorption takes place in jejunum part of our GI tract. So phosphate absorption occurs from the jejunum. Then some factors affecting this phosphate absorption from the jejunum. So we have seen this factor. First factor is calcitriol, that is vitamin D. Second is dietary intake of calcium and phosphate proportion. Then acidity, and fourth one is the phytates. So calcitriol, which promotes the phosphate absorption from jejunum, also it promotes calcium absorption from duodenum. So vitamin D is one of the important factor for the absorption of calcium as well as phosphate. Then dietary intake of C, A and P, that means calcium and phosphate should be in the proportion, that means 1:2 or 2:1. Then acidity regarding the pH level of the GI tract. So low pH is favorable for the phosphate absorption as well as calcium absorption from the GI tract. So low pH or acidity favors the phosphate absorption as well as calcium absorption. Then phytates decreases the phosphate as well as calcium absorption. So we have seen the some factors here which are promoting and which are inhibiting the phosphate absorption. So promoting factors are vitamin D, then acidity, while phytates is the inhibitory factor for the phosphate absorption. Now next is serum phosphate level. So we have seen that level of phosphate in the whole blood as well as in the serum. So in serum there is a phosphate is present in the level that is 3 to 4 mg per deciliter, while in the whole blood phosphate is present around the 40 mg per deciliter. So per deciliter of blood contains 40 mg of phosphate, while per deciliter of serum contains 3 to 4 mg of phosphate. So, and this difference is because of the form elements, especially RBC and WBCs, because these are present in the whole blood, and in these RBCs and WBC there is a very high content of the phosphate, so that there is a difference between the whole blood level of phosphate and serum level of phosphate. Now phosphate excretion. So phosphate get excreted from our body through the urine, and for the excretion of phosphate one important hormone is important, that is PTH, parathormone. So phosphorus excretion, so about 500 mg of phosphate is excreted in the urine per day. Now this is state regarding the phosphate. Serum phosphate level is increased in the hypoparathyroidism because PTH hormone, that means parathormone, is responsible for phosphate excretion from the urine and as well as phosphate absorption from the GI tract. So when there is a hypoparathyroidism, there is a decrease in the level of serum phosphate. Increase in the level of serum phosphate. While in the hyperparathyroidism, there is a decrease in the serum phosphate level. In severe renal diseases, there is a increase in the serum phosphate level. So phosphate excretion decreases in the severe renal diseases, so that there is a increase in the serum phosphate level and it will produces acidosis. Now last one, vitamin D deficiency is characterized by decreased serum phosphate, and decrease is about 1 to 2 mg per deciliter. So vitamin D is one of the promoting factor for the phosphate absorption from the GI tract, and when this vitamin D get deficient in the body, then phosphate absorption get decreases, and so that there is a decrease in the serum phosphorus level. So thanks for watching today's video. For any queries or questions, you can comment me.